Elena and Luke's love story began in an unexpected place, the vibrant streets of New York City, where the overwhelming buzz of life never ceased. Their paths crossed one chilly autumn afternoon in a small cafe near Central Park. Elena had been there for hours, sitting by the window, watching the world rush by. She had her favorite book open, but her mind was elsewhere. The noise of the city seemed to fade as she stared outside, lost in her thoughts. Then, as if summoned by the city's pulse itself, a stranger stepped into the cafe. He was tall, with dark hair that caught the sunlight streaming through the door. His eyes, a deep shade of green, immediately met hers across the room. For a brief moment, everything stopped. It wasn't the kind of encounter you read about in fairy tales, but there was an undeniable pull between them. It felt as if the universe had nudged them together. The stranger approached her table, his smile easy and unassuming. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, his voice calm, yet carrying an energy that drew her in. Elena blinked, caught off guard. "Sure," she replied, her heart racing for reasons she couldn't quite explain. They spoke for hours, losing track of time as they discovered shared interests, laughed at each other's quirks, and found themselves opening up about their lives. It wasn't the start of a whirlwind romance, but there was something genuine between them, something that felt like it could be the beginning of something special. And so it was. They exchanged numbers, not as an obligatory parting, but because they genuinely wanted to see each other again. Over the next few weeks, Elena and Luke spent nearly every moment together. They walked through Central Park, explored quirky neighborhoods, and shared secrets over quiet dinners. It was easy to be around Luke. His wit and charm were magnetic, and his kindness was impossible to ignore. He seemed to care deeply about the world and everyone in it, especially her. Elena found herself drawn to him in a way she had never experienced before. He was everything she had ever wanted in a partner, and more. One cold December evening, when snow began to fall softly over the city, Luke gave Elena a gift, a small golden locket with an inscription inside. Forever and always. She held it in her hands, feeling the weight of the gesture, the love it symbolized. It wasn't extravagant, but it was meaningful. "You're my forever, Elena," Luke had said, his voice soft, as if the words were sacred. Elena had kissed him then, feeling as if the world had melted away, leaving just the two of them in that perfect moment. But as the months went by, Elena began to notice small, subtle changes in Luke. At first, she thought she was imagining it, his late-night texts becoming more frequent, the occasional missed calls, his phone buzzing every few minutes when they were together. He didn't seem to be as present as before. There was a distance in his eyes when he spoke, a hesitation in his voice that she couldn't ignore. But every time she asked him about it, Luke reassured her, brushing it off as nothing. "You worry too much, Elena. Everything is fine," he'd say with a smile, as if the matter were insignificant. But Elena couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She began noticing strange names on his phone screen, names that didn't seem familiar. There were late-night phone calls, texts sent in the early hours of the morning. It gnawed at her, but she wanted to trust him. Still, the doubt festered in her heart. One evening, after a particularly tense conversation, Elena decided she couldn't keep ignoring her intuition. She confronted him, her voice trembling with fear and anger. "Who is she, Luke?" she demanded. "I've seen the messages. You've been hiding something from me." Luke's expression changed. It was subtle, but Elena noticed it, the flicker of defensiveness in his eyes. "It's nothing, Elena," he said, his tone dismissive. "You're overreacting. You don't have anything to worry about." But the more he spoke, the more Elena's heart broke. His words didn't match his actions. The truth was there, just beneath the surface, and she could no longer ignore it. Unable to hold back the flood of emotions, Elena left the apartment. She needed space, time to think, to process everything. She went to the one place that had always given her comfort, the cafe where they had met. She sat by the window, the snow falling softly outside, and tried to make sense of what was happening. The world outside felt so far removed from the hurt she was feeling, yet her mind kept circling back to Luke and the betrayal she could no longer deny. That night, Elena did something she'd never done before. She checked his phone. She didn't want to, but the need for answers was overwhelming. What she found shook her to the core. Messages from another woman, intimate exchanges that were too personal to be innocent. Her heart broke as she read the words, each one a dagger to the trust she had placed in him. Luke had been lying, and worse, he had been seeing someone else behind her back. When Luke came home that evening, Elena confronted him again. "How could you do this to me?" she cried, her voice breaking. "I trusted you. I loved you." Luke, however, showed no remorse. His expression was cold, distant. "It's not a big deal, Elena. You're making it into something it's not," he said, his voice matter-of-fact. Her heart shattered. She had given him everything, and he had taken it for granted. "I can't do this anymore," Elena whispered. "I can't be with someone who doesn't respect me." She packed her things that night and left. There was no dramatic farewell, no grand gesture, just the quiet, painful realization that everything they had built was gone. Elena moved back to her parents' house, trying to heal, but the emptiness in her heart lingered, a constant reminder of what she had lost. Days turned into weeks. Elena tried to move on, but the memories of Luke haunted her. She could still feel his arms around her, the warmth of his touch, the tenderness in his eyes when he whispered, "I love you." The pain of betrayal was unbearable, and she found herself questioning everything she had believed in. Luke, for his part, seemed unfazed. He continued with his life as if nothing had changed. But as the days wore on, Elena began to notice strange things happening around her. Mugs would fall off shelves, pictures would shift on the walls. It started out small, easy to dismiss, but soon the occurrences grew more frequent. One night, while she sat alone in her apartment, the lights flickered and went out. Elena felt a chill in the air, and the temperature in the room dropped drastically. She could almost feel a presence behind her, though when she turned around, no one was there. But she wasn't alone. Elena's spirit, broken by betrayal, had not found peace. She was trapped in her anger, in the agony of what Luke had done. The once vibrant love between them had turned into something darker, something that could not be so easily erased. As the weeks turned into months, Luke's life began to unravel. Strange things started happening to him. Objects moved when no one was around, doors creaked open on their own, and the feeling of being watched followed him wherever he went. Late at night, he would hear Elena's voice, faint at first, a whisper, but growing louder with each passing day. "Have you forgotten me, Luke?" it would say, her voice filled with sorrow and rage. Terrified, Luke sought help, but no one could provide the answers he needed. He couldn't escape Elena's presence. He could feel her everywhere, and the guilt that had once seemed so distant now consumed him. He knew what he had done. He knew he had destroyed the one thing he had ever truly cared about. And now, her spirit was making him pay. The hauntings continued, and Luke realized that he could no longer live in the same way. Desperate for peace, he sought out spiritualists, therapists, anyone who could help him rid himself of the torment he felt. He found an elderly woman who was known for her knowledge of the supernatural. She listened to his story and gave him advice that he had no choice but to follow. "You must find a way to give her peace," she said. "You cannot undo what you've done, but you can make amends. If her anger consumes her, it will consume you as well." Luke knew what he had to do. In a final attempt to make things right, Luke returned to the cafe where they had met. He sat alone at the table by the window, just as they had all those months ago. With trembling hands, he opened the golden locket that Elena had given him. Inside, it still read, "Forever and always." He whispered her name into the empty room, hoping, praying that somehow Elena could hear him. "I am sorry, Elena," he whispered. "I never meant to hurt you. I love you." For the first time, the weight in his chest lifted. The air around him seemed to shift, and in that moment he knew Elena's spirit had finally found peace. The torment that had haunted him for so long was over. And in that quiet moment, Luke realized the true meaning of love, not just in its moments of joy and passion, but in its ability to endure, to heal, and to forgive.